what a lot of people heard in that press conference will have been him trying to project a sense of America and a sense of strength. We know he's not going to invade Greenland. We know he's not going to invade the Panama Canal. He can rename the Gulf, whatever he wants. This is all about projection and perception.
To me, Donald Trump often plays the role of a matador, and he waves a red cape and everybody follows the red cape and then says, gosh, what happened?
So do you think he will get mass deportation of, 15 million immigrants done? Is that what you expect to see?
If you look at when Trump would sign an executive order, what was in the executive order was almost secondary to the larger issue around it. Sometimes the executive orders didn't really do anything. But he would talk about the issue. Let's say it was immigration and the border. He would sign it in front of everybody, and then he would hold it up and say, look what I just did.
Before you watch today's episode, we want to remind you that tickets are on sale for the newsagent's live shows with HSBC UK. We're kicking off our tour at Birmingham Symphony Hall on February the 17th. Then we're off to the Bridgewater Hall in Manchester, that's on February the 24th. And finally to Usher Hall in Edinburgh on March the 11th. Head over to Global Player to get your tickets for any of those dates. The link will be in the description below. We're really excited to see you there.
Can you assure the world that as you try to get control of these areas, you are not going to use military or economic coercion?
No.
And can you tell us a little bit about what your plan is?
You're talking about Panama and Greenland. No, I can't assure you on either of those two. But I can say this. We need them for economic security. The Panama Canal is vital to our country. It's being operated by China. And we gave the Panama Canal to Panama. We didn't give it to China because Canada and the United States, that would really be something. You get rid of that artificially drawn line and you take a look at what that looks like. And it would also be much better for national security. Don't forget, we basically protect Canada.
So, good news for Canada, you're not going to be invaded. Bad news, Greenland, and indeed, Panama, you might be. It is 12 days to go until inauguration. It already feels as if Trump is president. And today, we're going to take you through some of the key moments of that press conference. And we're going to be hearing from two sides of the Republican Party, MAGA and traditional, and decipher what Trump is really going to get up to as things kick off. Welcome to the Newsagents USA.
The Newsagents USA.
It's Emily, and, well, our favourite marsupial is still bouncing around down under, but sending thoughtful notes each day, so that's nice. And here we are, less than 2 weeks out from Inauguration Day, the 20th of January. It already feels, as I was saying, as if Trump is president, partly because the stage has been almost spectacularly vacated by President Biden. It does feel like he has exited already, and partly because there is a sort of familiarity, a genuine gut or muscle memory of what those 2016 years felt like and just what it's going to be like all over again. Well, yesterday in a press conference at Mar-a-Lago, just the second actually since he won the election, he opened it up to the floor for an hour. He took questions on anything and everything. And it was a sort of reminder for many of us listening as journalists or reporters that we are going to have to try and distinguish what of these statements is saber-rattling, what of these statements is potentially going to happen, and what are the statements that are just about Trump liking the sound of these strongman phrases that somehow give the perception to his voters that he's about to do stuff even if it will never happen. He was asked about Greenland. We should clarify, he's not going to invade Greenland. He's not, I don't think, going to invade Panama. He may be trying to send a message there to China, to Russia, to superpowers about getting their own hands-off territory that he thinks they're interested in. But the fact that his failure to rule out military intervention provoked another question on Canada I think tells you a lot. Have a listen.
Mr. President, if we were to work under the assumption that you're serious about making Canada 51st state of the United States, the leader of the Conservative Party in Canada said, under no circumstance will it ever be the 51st state.
Maybe he won't win, but maybe he will. I don't care.
You had suggested.
Listen, I don't care what he says.
But Sir, real fast, you said you were considering military force to acquire Panama and Greenland. Are you also considering military force to annex and acquire Canada?
No, economic force, because Canada and the United States, that would really be something. You get rid of that artificially drawn line, and you take a look at what that looks like. And it would also be much better for national security. Don't forget, we basically protect Canada. But here's the problem with Canada. So many friends up there. I love the Canadian people. They're great. But we're spending hundreds of billions a year to protect it.
I mean, let's put this in context. We've already seen this week, just as the year's beginning, the Canadian Prime Minister stepping down. He knew he'd got on the wrong side of Trump. That's not the only reason he went. He'd also been in the job nearly a decade. He was very out of favour in Canada. But there is a sense when Trump talks that he is playing God. He's deciding who the Canadians might be about to elect next. And he's talking about the need for economic cooperation, not with Canada, but from Canada, all related to his tariffs, as a way of getting a country that is not his own, that he does not rule, to do what he wants. And that is the context in which many of these questions are now coming. Greenland has already hit back saying it's not for sale. Panama, we're going to wait to see what happens there. But Trump is now back in full flow, and he's throwing out a couple of bits of red meat to the audience as well. Here's what he had to say about the Gulf of Mexico.
Most of the work there, and it's ours. We're going to be changing, sort of the opposite of Biden, where he's closing everything up, essentially getting rid of $50 to $60 trillion worth of assets. We're going to be changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, which has a beautiful ring that covers a lot of territory. The Gulf of America, what a beautiful name.
So there you go. Absolute genius, actually. Banking a load of cost-free wins by deciding to change the name of the Gulf of Mexico. I think that's a red meat win. The Mexicans presumably will still carry on calling it the Gulf of Mexico if they want. Americans, MAGA Americans, can call it the Gulf of America if they want. And Trump speaks to his audience. It kind of brings the America First agenda, the nationalist agenda, the patriot agenda to the fore without really doing anything at all. It's quite a cheap shot, but possibly quite an effective one. What was more alarming, I think you could say, was his description and threat to the special counsel, Jack Smith, an employee of the Justice Department. Have a listen.
They brought this moron out of The Hague. He's a mean guy. He's a mean, nasty guy. His picture was perfect, because you look at his picture, you say, that's a bad guy with his robe, his purple robe. And he executes people. He shouldn't be allowed to execute people because he'll execute everybody. He's a nut job. But we won all of those cases with him. And, I don't know the judge in Florida, but we had a brilliant judge in Florida that saw right through it. And we won the case. She was brilliant.
OK, so quick fact check here. So the person he's talking about there, Jack Smith, used to work at The Hague. He was a criminal prosecutor. The Hague is where they try people for war crimes. He has not executed anyone. You cannot execute anyone at The Hague. You can hand out sentences of up to 30 years. And the other fact check we should make is that Trump's lot didn't win all their cases with him, but Jack Smith was made to withdraw some of those cases because he realised that Trump would simply throw them out when he came into office. And I think this speaks to something that is much more alarming, which is a threat to employees at the Justice Department. And Jack Smith will now be thinking very seriously about his future, because Trump is able to punish, to meter out punishment to him, to his deputies, in a way that is making some think that he will probably leave the country. This is not a state of affairs which is particularly healthy or particularly encouraging for Americans to view their own rule of law. There's a lot to unpack in that press conference, and the person we're turning to help us is Doug Heye. Now, he's a veteran Republican strategist. He is, we should say, a Trump skeptic. We're going to speak to a Trump fan a little bit later. And Doug, I'm assuming you watched what happened last night. Give us your sense of what impression it really left on you.
Well, it's a lot. And it starts with the reminder of this is what the first Trump 4 years were like. Out of nowhere, he dominates a news cycle. And quite often it's on topics that nobody was really looking at or thinking about, things that just sort of come out of nowhere. And I'm reminded that while he is in a honeymoon period with House Republicans, Senate Republicans, and even some of those voters who didn't like Trump and didn't like Harris but voted for him, that when this comes along, things like this, it can create problems for him. He doesn't necessarily have a mandate, which is a word that I think is overused in American politics anyways. But clearly the issues of the economy, inflation, and the border were 1 and 2 of why Donald Trump was reelected.
What do you mean he doesn't have a mandate?
We say in American politics, if you win by a certain margin, the voters sent me here and I'm going to accomplish X. Well, what the voters said last year was, we don't really like either of these candidates, but we're scared of the direction of the economy. And we don't like the situation at the border that seems to be just wide open and causing problems, then throughout the country. And what happened in the election, I think it sort of gets lost because Donald Trump is Donald Trump. And we have to view everything through that lens, whether we want to or not. What happened in the election was that an unpopular incumbent vice president of an unpopular incumbent president lost. That's what's supposed to happen. That's normal.
I think that's going to be a really hard thing for many Americans to hear, because actually he did win, Doug. He won the House, he won the Senate, he won the popular vote. He managed to make inroads even in very blue Democratic areas. It sounds like sour grapes if you don't accept the fact that this guy, hands down, won the election.
Oh, he absolutely hands down won the election. And he overperformed in a lot of communities that Republicans had struggled with. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But it's not, I don't think, a broad mandate to then do whatever you want. Because if you look at the Electoral College, huge margin. And he won remarkably all of the swing states. Every state that was in question, Trump won. But it's not that he won it in a slam dunk running away. And if you look at what the popular vote margin is, it's now less than 50%, which he doesn't want to acknowledge. And the margin was about 1.46 is the last that I saw. So look, his support, is an inch deep. It's also miles and miles wide. It doesn't mean, though, that those voters, whether you're a Muslim voter in Dearborn, Michigan, or a suburban mom in Raleigh, North Carolina, 2 swing states that Trump won, or Scottsdale, Arizona, that you said, yeah, I want Donald Trump to take over Greenland, to start a war in the Panama Canal, and to rename the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. That's not what people were voting on. And I think Trump would be smart to, remember what this election was about and to focus on those 2 things and not get in his own way. And he has a tendency to do that.
Don't you think we're just falling for the language? Whereas actually what a lot of people heard in that press conference will have been him trying to project a sense of America and a sense of strength. We know he's not going to invade Greenland. We know he's not going to invade the Panama Canal. He can rename the Gulf whatever he wants because it doesn't cost anything and the Mexicans can carry on calling it what they want to carry on calling it. This is all about projection and perception, and that's the job that he's done.
Look, that's a big part of it. And to me, Donald Trump often plays the role of a matador, and he waves a red cape and everybody follows the red cape and then says, gosh, what happened? It's one of the things that I'm reminding myself now that Trump is fully back, reminding myself not to sort of fall for that trap. But we had a long press conference where we didn't talk about those things that Trump needs to do to address the questions that voters had that helped get him into the White House. And, very clearly, with a very slim House majority, the Senate majority is, at 53 is fine on the House side, and we're losing a couple because of, going into the administration, Elise Stefanik and so forth. Getting things done is going to be very tough.
Just to clarify, what you're saying is that because he's replacing some of those House representatives into bigger jobs, he's then going to have a tighter margin of people in the House to get things done. So do you think, we've just seen the Speaker secure his position by this very minimal margin of, I think, 2 votes. Do you think he's going to rub up against his own party in Congress?
In some ways, yes, and some of that is, again, completely normal because of Donald Trump being who he is. We judge things always through a different lens. There are normal politics at play. So, the House has said we want to do one large reconciliation package. The Senate has said we want to do 2 smaller bills, and that is normal. The House and the Senate fight regardless of what party is in power in either case. But given these slim majorities and what we saw in the Speaker vote as a reminder that to Trump and to Republicans that success is not guaranteed, especially if you're going to have to vote on things like a debt ceiling and so forth, it's a very tough road ahead. And I think Trump would suit himself well to stay out of his own way when it comes to issues like this.
So stay out of his own way means just talk about the economy, just talk about immigration. He gave a press conference and I guess he was just asked a lot of questions. Yeah,
and then took things into very weird and different areas. Again, this is what Trump does. This is not new. It's just the latest variation on that theme. But if you look at presidents, Trump and past presidents, they usually get their one big thing through, right? Obama got Obamacare through. That was basically it legislatively. Trump with the tax cuts, same thing. Biden, with the Inflation Reduction Act. You get your one big ticket thing in, and given the very, very slim majority that Trump has, especially in the House, I'd focus on that and pretty much only that.
So do you think he will get mass deportation of, 15 million immigrants done? Is that what you expect to see?
I don't, and with the caveat that if I am wrong on this, then I will, mea culpa with you immediately. My expectation is that we'll see Trump do something that is sort of similar to what he's done in the past. If you look at when Trump would sign an executive order, what was in the executive order was almost secondary to the larger issue around it. Sometimes the executive orders didn't really do anything. But he would talk about the issue. Let's say it was immigration and the border. He would sign it in front of everybody, and then he would hold it up and say, look what I just did. And it was very shrewd of him to do it in that way. And I expect on this, we're not going to see, a lot of reports of all of a sudden groups of 50, or 75 people in 20 communities in America have vanished. We may see 1 or 2 of those where there have been, issues of crime and so forth. But I expect, or I would also recommend if I were advising him, to, find some of the real examples. The drug lord who crossed the border illegally and then caused other crimes. The person who did commit capital crimes after crossing the border here, whether they came from Mexico or Venezuela or Honduras or whatever, and have a press conference and say, I just got these 4 people, these 8 people out of the country. There's virtually no American who would oppose that. I think it would help Trump a great deal. And it's interesting because I always thought when Donald Trump won that if he were the great deal maker that he sort of built himself to be, that Donald Trump, given the strength that he had with his base, could cut the deal on guns and on immigration that, let's say, if Marco Rubio or Jeb Bush had won, the Republican base would not have allowed them to. Trump didn't do that. It's also why he didn't get an infrastructure deal. So that ship has sailed. So he now has to talk about this, I think, in a way that convinces voters that he's doing a good thing for them And I think this would be a smart way to do it.
Let me ask you about the relationship that seems to be right at the centre of this administration, Elon Musk and Donald Trump. And we are finding our own politics has been weirdly interfered with by Elon Musk in the kind of first week of this year. Do you think the relationship is sustainable?
Well, what we've seen is the relationship with Donald Trump isn't sustainable for a lot of people. And, I say that having worked with Reince Priebus at the Republican National Committee, and he was left on a tarmac and was told he was fired, find your way home. The press secretary there was Sean Spicer. He followed me at the RNC. He was dumped. And that seems to be a very consistent theme that in politics, you always serve at the pleasure of the politician. In theory, you always have a sword of Damocles hanging over you. It's not really that negative, but it's there. It's very different with Trump. He constantly talks about who's nice to him and who's not. And as Democrats are trying to create a wedge between Trump and Musk, they clearly see an opportunity there. But Musk could be a first among equals. And as we've seen some of the tech community move towards Trump in a way that they sure didn't, if we're talking in January of 2017, perhaps Musk can stick around longer. And it also makes what he said, being a sort of a nerd of British politics, what he has said about now Nigel Farage in the past week or two, really interesting to me, because I just got invited to a reception around the inauguration that Farage will be at. I remember being invited to one in 2017, and Farage has, I think, very skillfully woven himself into sort of the Trump community. And so this move was a little bizarre to me by Musk.
Do you think that Farage is out of favour for good now? I mean, what is your sense from the reception you think he's getting?
Well, he's not out of favour within Trump world. Obviously, Musk has now, thrown a little bit of a wrench in that. But one of the things that we know with Donald Trump is, Donald Trump's not somebody who gives points. He only takes them away one at a time. And as long as he thinks that you can do something for him, and I still don't understand the value of having Farage speak at a rally in 2016 and say Alabama. Not sure what voter that delivers, but he clearly sees a use for Farage. And look, I've met Farage a few times. Anybody who's been around him, he's fun and jovial. You like being around him. That's a factor as well. Even if Nigel's having a pint and Trump certainly won't. But Trump may want to keep him around for, his alternative purposes. The question with Musk, I think, becomes a bit interesting. And just sort of as a side note, after the elections, I spoke to folks at the British Embassy here and the French Embassy as well, as they're trying to get a sense of, what, the new political realities were. And I said to both of those embassies, I said, well, what do you do if Donald Trump has a state dinner for Keir Starmer and he invites Nigel Farage? What do you do, French Embassy, if Trump has a state dinner for Macron
and invites Eric
Le
Zemmour?
Pen?
Yeah.
And that's a reality that they have to face with. And it's interesting because I'm reminded, I just looked at this the other day. So I was in London over Christmas of 2016. And I remember walking down a street in South Kensington, and there was like a bank or an insurance office that had a poster of Donald Trump in the window. And it said, come find out what this means when what you didn't plan for happens, or something like that. And I was so struck by it. It's 6 weeks after the election, and a British company is advertising using Donald Trump as an example. And I think that's a lesson that people in American politics can certainly take. And if you are one of our allies who have real questions, I think that speaks to it.
Doug, hi. Great to speak to you. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us.
I find it absolutely appalling that any leader of a country would protect rapists, especially people that rape children. I can't imagine that they would allow this to continue, and they should rein it in. The people that belong in jail are the ones that are raping minors, not the fathers and parents that are trying to protect their kids.
What do you think about the decision?
That's an elected representative from the House, from Georgia, Marjorie Taylor Greene, showing just how willfully ignorant of most facts in the UK many can be. She's one of several MAGA folk who have been pushing a false narrative about Keir Starmer's involvement in what Elon Musk has called the rape of Britain. And we're going to speak now to Dan Cox, who curiously got in touch with me. Well, joining us now is Dan Cox. He's a former member of the Maryland House of Delegates. He stood for the Maryland governor in 2022. He's very much from the MAGA tribe, solid backer of Trump. And Dan, I think we should take our listeners behind the curtain, because you got in touch with me because you'd been seeing stuff on social media about the UK, and all credit to you, you wanted to fact check it. So give us a sense of what's hitting you there.
We heard some news reports about potentially some members of parliament that were appearing to defend, regarding the migrant issue, defending something that kind of took us by surprise, this rape gang issue that seems to be, as you pointed out, a long time issue coming back to the surface. So one of the things I want to start with is how much Americans love Great Britain. We literally come there and we love our mutual identities. We love traveling there. In fact, I remember taking my son there and seeing at the tower there in London, one of the beef masters asked, how many people here in the crowd, about 50 in the tour or whatever it was, how many are from America? And I think probably nearly 40, I would say 40, maybe 40 people raised their hands.
Amazing.
So
Dan, we call them beef eaters. We're very carnivorous here.
There, but it didn't surprise me, because back home here, we have this mutual identity.
What were you actually hearing on social media about the UK over the new year?
What came to the surface was this rape gang issue, and frankly, it surprised me simply because I heard there were potential backlashes happening against those who opposed it, particularly parents. And to also hear that while a parent might be going to jail, I think a father was arrested twice for trying to rescue his daughter in a place called Rochdale. I don't know if I'm saying the town name right. Arrested twice to try to rescue his underage minor daughter from a alleged gang rape incident. He goes to jail, and yet somebody like Qari Abdul Rauf, and this is, I think, related to what I might have reached out to you about, who was convicted 10 years ago and deported, or ordered to be deported. And yet here he is still in one of your cities. I think it's Rotterdam or something. But in any case, or not Rotterdam, sorry.
Rotherham.
Rotterdam. I didn't say it right. I apologize. But that concerned us because we actually send our children to university in England. We love England. And obviously, as someone who loves very much President Trump and the incoming administration, we want to have the best relationship that we can have with our friends there in the UK. And any way that we can move the ball forward to advance law and order is something that I think we're all on the same page for. It's
confused a lot of British people, because the scandal that you're talking about, horrendous, horrific, is over 20 years old. And there have been, in those years, 10 different inquiries and reports into the grooming gangs. And the sense here is that issue has been dragged up by Elon Musk because he is trying to exert influence to depose the democratically elected Prime Minister of the UK. He doesn't like Keir Starmer. He's made that very clear. And even though Starmer was the prosecutor at the time over many of those convictions in the 2010s, he wants Starmer to go. I just wonder if your sense of what you're discussing is altered by an understanding of the rancor that Elon Musk has for Keir Starmer.
Well, I'm not familiar with that. Obviously, I've never actually met Elon Musk, but I can tell you from the reason I follow and like what he says, two things that we know about Elon. He loves his family and children, and he loves freedom.
What would happen if a British businessmen started calling for your politicians to go?
Well, interestingly, as a member of the legislature, I was called out in the British UK, in the British media, because of a couple speeches I made to protect children. I referenced, I believe it was the international standards of human rights, and mentioned how children and parental rights need to be protected. And without getting into the details of the debate, I was vilified at times with certain American media. Very few, obviously, most people support the concept of protecting children. But I mention this because when the British media picked up the issue, I received some really great encouragement as well from leadership in England. They emailed me saying, what you're saying is spot on, and thank you for speaking up. So I don't see it as a threat. I think it's actually more of a support. I mean, I think if you could understand, if England and Britain could understand how much we actually do love and care about our Western societies, and how much we care about the world, because we do believe that democracy and the opportunities for freedom is the answer to the cultures that we want to positively influence.
Let me pick up on that then. So when you're talking about democracies and freedoms, last night we heard Donald Trump, President-elect, talk about his refusal to take the idea of military action off the table for invading Greenland or the Panama Canal. How does that tie into your perception of democracy and freedom?
I think if you listen to him as you did, I listened and I loved the speech, because what he was saying very specifically was a warning to China. And I think we all can agree on this. When you have China running the Panama Canal, you will probably very quickly, in a national security situation, could lose, severe liberty. I mean, China, I don't think, is the model of democracy and freedom.
Dare I say that China could have heard something very different from that and said, oh, well, it's fine for us to invade Taiwan. It's fine for us to take parts of Siberia that at the moment they don't control. I mean, why would China assume that message didn't invite them to take similar military action?
I think because very clearly it's a warning. China is already exercising sovereign dominion over some of those areas, and it's very concerning to the democracies in those areas. For instance, we've got military bases springing up everywhere, nearly on the month.
There are a lot of people, though, who heard in Trump's campaign and message that he didn't like interference. He didn't like foreign wars. He didn't want to start sending US troops into places. How on earth do you reconcile what he's now talking about?
No, I totally agree with you, and that's why we love him here. Generally speaking, I can say down to the person of Donald Trump supporters and of the new government coming in, war is the one of the top issues of what we do, what we are disgusted with. I mean, I think it's an appropriate thing to look at the history of the last 20 years of American involvement in international wars and say we could do better. And that's the goal. And I think when you have a strong president who is asserting the willingness to use strength properly if needed to defend our freedom, it makes most of this go away.
Dan, can I respectfully suggest that there is a blind spot for many of Trump's supporters, which is basically that whatever he says, you're fine with. If he says, I don't like foreign wars, you cheer. If he says, I don't mind invading Greenland if I have to, you cheer. There is an inconsistency because whatever he suggests, you say, that's fine, that makes sense to me. It doesn't make logical sense to want both things at the same time.
Well, he never said he was going to invade Greenland. That's a misnomer. I think what you're pointing out is a question of, are we just blind following the leader? No, that is not who we are. And President Trump actually does not value anyone in his administration who blindly follows. In fact, he wants a vigorous and positive yet loyal approach to interaction. For instance, he doesn't want gainsayers, people that want to go down there and be their own star and try to run their own show, make a book, and make themselves famous. No, he truly cares about the country, and he wants people that are going to provide real opportunities, real discussion on how to do that. and not constantly, bad mouthing everybody that's trying to get that done. So it's a new day in America. It's a new day in Washington. Now that he's coming in the second term, he's determined to truly help and to make this legacy of the Make America Great Again actually be something that benefits and blesses the UK and the world. And it's exciting to see it.
Dan Cox, great to speak to you. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Emily. God bless, and God bless the UK.
Before we go, this is shaping up to be quite the week for the far right in France. What do we mean by that? We have seen the death of Jean-Marie Le Pen, the leader of the Front National, as was, the father of Marine Le Pen. He died aged 96 earlier this week. But the invitation to President Trump's inauguration has not gone to his daughter, Marine. It has gone to the man on the right of Marine Le Pen, the firebrand Eric Zemmour, the man who makes Marine Le Pen look centrist. It is shaping up to be quite the cast list, indeed quite the inauguration party, and we're going to be looking at what we can expect, who we can expect in more detail on next week's episode of the Newsagents USA. We'll see you then. We're both back. Bye for now.
The Newsagents USA.